Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if the people are still in the coffee break, but okay. We have to move. And now, before starting the part that we have to do, that is actually the methodology, we are going to move this after lunch due to time constraints. And we are going directly to panel 1 with Professor Vicente and the other panelists.
Thank you, Carolina. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm waiting for Giovanni Napolitano. I think, yes, already we can see Napolitano. The workshop kickoff is with this panel entitled The Role of SDGs and Data Sharing to Better Address Climate Change and Promote Shared Prosperity and Inclusive Growth, where we will discuss the validity of the SDGs framework for law and policy design, as well as the interconnections between the different SDGs in the world and in the context of Brazil. Today with me on this panel, as a moderator, I have the great pleasure and an honor to welcome our speakers. First of all, I have to say that Pilar Farjanis, unfortunately, she will not be able to join us. She sent me a message this morning, and I guess she is watching us because we are broadcasting live. So, Pilar, receive our warmest regard. But in the virtual stage, we have Giovanni Napolitano. Giovanni Napolitano is an economist, and after working for the Italian Competition Authority, is now responsible for the IP and competition program at the World Intellectual Property Organization of the United Nations. In person, on the stage, they will be here soon because they want to watch Giovanni Napolitano lecture from with the participants from the audience. We have Paulo Furquim de Azevedo and Dachel Velasque da Costa. Paulo Furquim is full professor at INSPER Institute and director of the Center of Regulation and Democracy. He was also visiting professor at MIT, visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, and commissioner at the Brazilian Competition Authority, CADE. Dachel da Costa is government auditor in TCU, Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts. He coordinated the audit on the preparedness of Latin American governments for implementing the 2030 agenda. Currently works as technical coordinator for the Climate Scanner Global Initiative. In the first round, I invite our speakers to deliver their lectures, where they will share with us their experience and knowledge. After that, I will address some questions, and for sure, I will open the floor to all participants in this workshop to question them or simply comment on the lectures or offer us insights. I will start virtually, inviting Giovanni Napolitano. Giovanni Napolitano, the floor is yours, even if virtually. Or the screen, if you prefer, Giovanni.
Thank you, Vicente. Before I start, Vicente, how much time do I have?
15 to 20 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Vicente. Thank you to the Mackenzie University for this invitation. When I was listening to Joseph Drexel's introduction this morning, I got a bit scared because when he was trying to give an overview of where all the issues were, he mentioned the competition policy, intellectual property, and I said, my God, I am at the center of this storm. But what kind of helps me go to sleep tonight is the fact that as an economist, I am not. I'm kind of shielded. I'm protected from all the legal intricacies that Joseph Drexel sketched this morning. But it's really a great pleasure. And what I would like to do today is to give you a presentation that is split in a way into two parts. The first one is about what we're doing here in Geneva at the World Intellectual Property Organization in terms of sustainable development goals. We have started a few years ago a project called WIPO Green that I will tell you a little bit about. That is very much an initiative on the ground to help those who can provide technology and intellectual property to those who are looking for that intellectual property and technologies, so that they can implement it in their own territories. And what we do is to facilitate this meeting. We make sure that the cooperation projects are implemented properly, and of course we just create a network of potential users and the providers of technology. So what I'll do now, I will share my presentation, and the presentation, I will not present all the slides in the presentation, but I think that it would be useful for you to have the whole presentation with all the different data, and I hope that you can see it now. Yes, I can see it on the screen. I will just put it in here. Okay, there you go. Here on the first page, you also find the link to our page on IP and competition, where we have some of the activities and some of the studies that we've been doing over the past few years. I will skip this slide about WIPO. And just tell you a little bit what WIPO Green is. We really try to to support sustainable technology. We really try to focus on core technologies that are relevant for the different member states. Although, of course, we are not providers of the technology themselves, but thanks to our databases, we have been able to put together, I think, a good number of technologies and potential users, particularly for what SDG 13 is concerned. So we have more than 100,000 technologies available, but also needs and experts that can be available for implementing the different projects. We have several hundreds users worldwide and more than 100 connections, which means that more than 800 joint projects have been established. What we have in particular, and what we've been doing in the past, I would say 3 to 4 years, is to have acceleration projects. So whenever we see that there is a concrete interest, and from both parties, from the supplier and the user side, we kind of step in and make sure that all the various steps are taken, that if there are any IP related issues, that we provide our expertise so that they can be sorted out in the most efficient way. And in particular, we've been doing what we call climate smart agriculture in several countries in Latin America, including Brazil. And I believe that Embrepa in Brazil, who is going to probably speak later, one of the representatives is also involved in this project. What we've done this year, and we have presented it at COP27 in Egypt, is the Green Technology Book, and we will be doing this every year. So we focus on certain technologies, and this year was about agriculture and forestry, water and coastal regions, and cities. So we focus on specific areas, and we provide digitally all the possible options that are available in terms of implementing available technologies. Now, the technologies are not all of the same kind. In a way, there are what we call proven technologies. These are more standard technologies that have been implemented already in several countries. Then we have frontier technologies and horizon technologies. Now, all of this is digital. So you can go on our website, you can see anything that is available. The database is completely transparent. Of course, if you are one of the potential users or suppliers, then you have to log in. But otherwise, if you just want to browse through anything that is available and everything that is going on in different technological areas, it's all there. And this is the way in which, we try to also make sure that the SDGs or the United Nations in general are not sort of believed to be a place where there is a lot of talking but little walking. So we're trying to use whatever we know about intellectual property to see how this can be exploited in specific areas of the world. As I mentioned to you, actually, in fact, we started in 2015 with the acceleration projects. So we've done a few of them where we thought that our intervention could have been useful to not only make sure that the parties would agree on the transfer of technology, but also that it would happen in a speedy way, because often time is of the essence, and we just want to make sure that if there is an opportunity, this is not missed just because of a glitch in the system or in the technology transfer. So the acceleration projects, as I mentioned, this is really a focused matchmaking. We identify specific subjects and locations. We involve our local consultants that are also included in the WIPO Green database, and basically we act as a sort of technology agent for those who really own needs in the different member states. This is the one that I was mentioning to you that is happening in Latin America, and we started in 2019. One of the elements that we also exploit is the fact that we can gauge an interest from member states that are ready to provide funding, and in this case, the second and the third, which is the final phase of the funding, has been provided by the Japanese government, and this is something that also helps us to make sure that some of these projects are implemented quickly. This is the one about Brazil, where Embrepa was involved, and it's about no-till agriculture. So again, we are trying to move from an agency that is just concerned about protecting the rights worldwide into an agency that tries to use those rights to make sure that they can be used to the best, in the best possible way, whenever these technologies could be helpful. Now, this is the part that I wanted to talk about as an introduction about SDGs, because one of the questions, Vicente, that you proposed to the panel is whether the SDG framework is actually helpful to fight climate change, and of course it's a big machinery, it's a complex system, but at the same time it has helped, I think, governments, but also individual specialized agencies like WIPO to kind of find ways in which we could go a little bit beyond our mandate, and really try to see on the ground what could work and what member states need, and this is one of the initiatives that we thought could be helpful. I also wanted to be honest, this is not something that worked well from day one. We needed really to do a lot of work in terms of showing how the system works, how it could be used, in which way it could be exploited, how companies could be contacted and engaged in different projects. And for those of you who will be interested in looking at the database, you will see that for each of the technologies is very user-friendly. You can contact directly the company. You can check on the website what the technologies are, and we can also facilitate the contacts if that is helpful. So we really try to be concrete and specific in this initiative. Now, the second part of the this is more about the the issue that also Joseph Drexel was talking about this morning about data. I will not specifically talk about digital platforms today, but more about the whole discussion that is happening about sustainability and competition policy, what activities we are carrying out, and how we can help the business community maybe to understand what could be the impact of on their IP-related data when they are sharing those data in cooperative projects. So this is an issue that, let's say, has been dealt with only relatively recently. There have been several OECD meetings on that, but also UNCTAD has been working on this, and there are several elements, of course, that affect the relationship between competition and sustainability. One of them is, of course, how to deal with competitors that work with each other. Another one is what happens to mergers in terms of what could be the development of long-term green technologies. Is that merger going to be conducive to develop those technologies, or maybe some of the innovation avenues will be disrupted because the merged company will not pursue all the different options that the independent companies were carrying out before. So is the merger going to help the development of green technologies, or is going to slow down that development? And then there is the issue, which I will not deal with specifically today, which is what happens when a dominant company, a company that therefore has a significant market power, introduces possibly some green solutions that are more expensive for consumers. Will that company be put under scrutiny by a competition authority because maybe prices are excessive, or will the sustainability element, will the green element sort of counterbalance the sort of the short-term higher cost for consumers? So there are several elements and several dimensions that we need to look at. So our objective is mainly to look at different aspects of this relationship, and one of them, is when you have cooperative projects, because some of these sustainable projects, they need to have most, if not all, the players in the specific market, and so they will need to share data, and most of them will be IP-related data. And will they be allowed to do that without any risk of fall under an investigation by a competition authority, or are there some safe harbors that they can rely on? Or are there guidelines that maybe we at WIPO can develop to bring the two communities, the business community, the competition authorities communities together to see what these safe harbors could be and what could be allowed, so that companies can go ahead whenever there is a sustainability project. But also, are different operational options going to make a difference? Does it matter whether the companies will work together and share their data through a third-party research laboratory, or should they rather work in their own laboratories and then share the results of their research? The other part is, what about the intellectual property that will come out of the research projects? Will there be any antitrust sort of lenient approach when it comes to sustainability projects, or will that not matter at all? And finally, there could be good practices at the industry level that could help companies, but also competition authorities to find solutions to the this IP and competition interplay. As you can imagine, there are implications for intellectual property and all the data that come with that. What about the background IP? How are companies going to contribute with their IP? Is it going to be only, for instance, the kind of IP that is not really sensitive, but then would that be good enough to have good results at the end of the projects? And what happens to the ownership of the IP that will result by these cooperative projects, the so-called foreground IP? This is quite important, because the way in which this data, even all the data that are gathered through the different research activities, what's going to happen to those data that may or may not be protected by IP? And that's another element, right? What should companies do with the resulting data and information after the project is finished? Will the way in which they protect that data affect possible antitrust liabilities or not, because it is in the end a sustainable project? The other element is whether the licensing will be exclusive and open, and what happens to the intellectual property when governments are involved? Should that be completely open? And then and then we need to regulate somehow the fact that certain companies participate even financially to a certain project, but then they see all the resulting IP free for everyone, even those that did not take part even financially to that endeavor. So there are different elements that I think it's useful that we at WIPO look at. Of course, we all know that both IP and competition are territorial pieces of legislation, but I think that maybe some general guidelines could be developed to help in the specific countries to deal with these issues. I think we can. So. And I'm going towards the end. The risk is that if companies are worried about how competition law will be implemented in terms of the way in which they use the data and they share the data, that this could lead to a very timid initiative where the positive impact on the environment may be very limited. But also the financial system needs to maybe provide standards to understand what a proper sustainable project is, to avoid the risk of financing what is called just greenwashing activities. And but also how much data are companies allowed to share, for instance, in order to agree on certain green certifications concerning the products or the services that they develop. And also whether this standardization, I'm thinking about a project that we at WIPO have been involved with some chemical companies that want to develop, some new products that would replace plastic in the future. If they standardize certain processes in order to achieve certain results, should this standardization be compulsory or not? Because if it's compulsory, they don't want to run the risk of being accused of some kind of collective boycotting, because they would be excluding all those that do not belong to that standard to participate in the production of this new products. There are several issues from an IP perspective that I kind of touched upon even before, and as I mentioned, will the competitive assessment change if companies decide, for instance, to use third-party laboratories instead of their own labs? Finally, I think it's important that we look at and that we provide guidance on licenses. Will all these different aspects have an impact on the licensing when it comes to sustainability projects, and in particular, whether we look at commercial or non-commercial scope of the licensing, whether it should be sector restricted, or can the license be applied to any sector. So there are different layers again that I think add to the complexity of the issues, but we are starting to deal with it one by one. We believe that it's important that the competition law is supportive of this kind of collaborations among competitors, that the data that they share, of course, the companies themselves will be the first to make sure that they do not share the kind of information that would be considered as a competitive asset, but only the information that is necessary for them to carry out the project and to achieve relevant results. Vicente, I think I will stop here because I don't want to take too much time. I will also try to find a way to stop sharing. There we go. Thank you very much. I will stop here. If there are questions, I will be here, so I will be also listening to the other speakers, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Giovanni, I have to say that is the second time that Giovanni have been in Mackenzie at this semester. Even if virtually, Giovanni, is always a pleasure and an honor. And I have to say that I really appreciate the small watch that you have behind you. I do believe we need one of these here with us to control even my time. Thank you very much, Giovanni.
Well, I needed somehow to show that I was in Switzerland, right?
Thank you. Okay, now landing in São Paulo, Brazil, at Mackenzie, I invite Paulo Furquim and Dachel to join the stage with me. We start with Paulo Furquim with his lecture, and then we'll move to Dachel.
Well, good morning. Is it working? Do you hear me? Yep. So, good morning to everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation, for having me here. Vicente in particular for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to talk about this subject. I think very interesting. My contact with your project is quite new. I received the theme like a week ago, and so I have some thoughts on that. But take this as external view from in a very overview on the subject that I hope will be useful for you. Let me put this here. Also, I have to apologize that I will have to leave exactly at 1 p.m. I think I have now maybe the worst position in academics, which is being the dean of the faculty. So you can be sure that I would prefer to stay with you the whole workshop, but I have to take care of some problems in professor contracts. So unfortunately, I will miss presentation by Dachel and the discussion after. So in this short talk, what I intend to do is to go through three quite different topics. So data and sustainability, regulation and norms, and climate actions in Brazil. And at the end, they are seemingly unrelated. But at the end, I will try to interconnect all of them in this external view. So not knowing exactly the deep that you are going in your project. It's the view of mainly an economist that has also a strong background in competition law and other fields of law. So let's begin with the first topic. So data and sustainability, I begin with this idea that data as an asset or as a good. And you know that data is non-rival. If I use data, someone uses data, the others can also use the same data without depleting the good. The second is the intrinsic nature of data is non-excludable. It's difficult to exclude people from using the data. Of course, we intervene on that, and sometimes companies or public policy creates an artificial scarcity on data, so restrict the access to data. So that's the feature. What's the consequence? In the demand side, we always want to have the spread of data because it's good for everyone, it's non-depletable. So in the demand side, we have this position, but in the supply side, we don't have incentives to provide it. Is that because of this trade-off, we have several policies and some policy implications. One is to create artificially scarcity, excluding others from using data. And also, on the other hand, we also have some rules for the disclosure of data. So mandatory disclosure of data because of the effect on the demand side, or maybe even the public provision of data. Okay, so very short introduction, but actually extracting or creating value from data requires more than data. It's necessary also knowledge, and knowledge is not a public good. Knowledge sometimes knowledge is, as a rule actually, knowledge is tacit. And so it's not easily copied, it's not easily transacted. So it's proprietary. And in order to create value, it's important to know that we have to have also availability of knowledge. So the consequence of that is what we just saw in the previous slide is mitigated. So the incentives to provide data, they are there because we have to have knowledge together with data in order to create value. In order to really appropriate from the investment on data, you have to have this knowledge. If this knowledge is not available to everyone, then we have the incentives to provide data. And of course, companies know that, and they do several types of strategies in order to preserve the value of creating value by means of using data. Let's move to the other subject. So as I told you, seemingly unrelated topics. So regulation and norms. Let's talk first about data protection. As we saw in the presentation by the India representative here. It is an individual right, a fundamental right of privacy, and because of that, data protection law is mainly oriented to restricting the use or sharing data because of this individual and fundamental right. And this may create a gridlock effect. Of course, this depends on how the law is applied. But there is this potential for restricting the value for society of using data because you want to restrict the access to data, and may have a gridlock effect, which means that if every person has the veto power of using their own data, then we need to have the approval of everyone in order to use the collective data. So this is a tension. And you have another branch of law, competition policy, where, and this I think was very well covered by Giovanni's presentation, we have some limits for data sharing because of collusion. And also in merger analysis, this is not usually incorporated. So let's move to the third issue, seemingly unrelated issue. Climate actions in Brazil. I will begin with challenges and then opportunities. Challenges. Brazil is the largest meat producer. As a consequence, is the largest methane emitter. Also deforestation, although decreased a lot some 20 years ago, in the last 3 years, it also increased, and we are emitting greenhouse gases by means of deforestation and also the production of meat. On the other hand, so Brazil is a complex country, meaning that there are several nuances on this. How Brazil is, the context of Brazil in the world in terms of environment. We are a model of sustainable clean energy. So we are the world leader in clean bioenergy, the production of ethanol. And I add that the ethanol from sugarcane, even the first generation of ethanol of sugarcane, has the same properties as a second generation of ethanol in the US. So the carbon footprint is much superior than the first generation of ethanol that is produced by corn. Also, we have in Brazil a flourishing wind and solar energy. It's increasing a lot, and hydropower for a long time. We do have that. So it's, in terms of sustainable clean energy, we do have the elements nowadays. And what are the opportunities? So the opportunities are, I think, are huge. We have an ongoing revolution in agriculture in Brazil. Some of these techniques are here for a long time. For instance, the no-tillage technique was developed in Brazil. This is a typical requirement for agriculture in tropical areas. It's something that is not so well spread, I think, is that it's very difficult to have agriculture in tropical areas. And Brazil is the only successful example. And it's not by nature, it's technology, it's the accumulation of technology. So very interesting to have here today a panel on that with a representative by Embrapa, but not only Embrapa. Several other organizations and farmers, they contributed to this evolution of this technology. And this, there are several examples like precision agriculture, integrated agri-forest systems. And as a consequence, I think we have the potential not only to be what we are today, the largest food supplier in the world, but also the largest supplier of carbon credits. What we are not today, for sure. And the reason is that we have competitive advantages at providing or extracting carbon from the atmosphere. So the last figure that I saw, it was extracting carbon from the atmosphere was 10 times more expensive in Japan than in Brazil. And then we have opportunities for trade, because the question is not local emissions, but global emissions. So we have opportunities for trade. And also, I submit that this is a package of technologies that is available for any tropical country, in particular African countries or some other Latin American countries. So let's put all the issues together. So you have these opportunities to trade environmentally sustainable goods. Okay, but it's not that easy to do that. They are credence goods. A liter of ethanol may be produced in by means of very different process. Some have a superior carbon footprint, the other has a much inferior carbon footprint. But the molecule is the same. So a consumer cannot distinguish between the 2 liters. So you have to provide this information. And how to provide this information? So there are some solutions for that. One solution is regulation, as it is the case of pharmaceuticals. So we have the case of generic drugs. So this is a way of providing information about a product. We can do that. Or we can have a system of private information sharing. That's exactly what's happening in bioenergy for a while already. So we have private certification standards. This is a mechanism for providing this information. But I submit to you that maybe you have a more interesting mechanism nowadays, which are smart contracts and the use of blockchain that will carry on this information throughout the supply chain. And that's exactly the point. We want to have the information from previous steps on the production chain, and that information to arrive in the consumer. And then we need to share information vertically in the production chains. A different subject from sharing among competitors. So there are some implications for regulation and norms. So this proper working of this system, this private system of providing information by means of these smart contracts, may be in conflict with the data sharing law or data protecting law, because we want this information to flow. And this information may have some restrictions for this information to flow. And also for the competition law. For the competition law, because companies have to agree on the standards, so they have to share information and they have to communicate competitors in order to reach those standards. So this may be something, a conflict that we have for regulation and norms. And so my point, the takeaway is that we should incorporate these implications on the enforcement on data protection law and competition law. Not necessarily changing the law, is the interpretation of the law. So the requirements for adopting understanding of the importance of these issues and adapting the enforcement of law are already there. So we may just have to incorporate in the enforcement. There are other relevant issues that I will not touch here, but I will raise as possible interesting things as I conclude now. One is, I think, something that Giovanni touched with much more time and detail. So IP rights, but there are IP rights related to green economy nowadays that may be concentrated in few actors. And there is a discussion if what are the trade-offs of providing the incentives for innovation, but also providing the benefit for sharing the information, sharing a non-rival good. It's a non-rival good, you always have the benefit of sharing. The problem is the incentive to provide the good. The second is how to reconcile protection to privacy and creation of value for society. And one thing that I didn't touch, but I think we have huge opportunities in Brazil, and so the idea of this talk is to have this overview and applying to Brazil, is urban climate actions. So my talk was mainly about agriculture, deforestation, but also we have huge challenges. You can walk around in São Paulo and witness by yourselves, but also tremendous opportunities exactly because of the challenges. So emissions in São Paulo are huge, and the opportunities for changing mobility, the use of energy are also huge. And this, I think, is a subject that is worth touching. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Furquim. As always, it was brilliant. I know that you have to leave, unfortunately, and please accept my apologize for being late. No, we have to accept our apologize. So if you have 4 minutes, Dachel, we are very excited to know a little bit about the Climate Scanner program. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Just a test? Okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Dachel Costa, and I work at the Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts. And I have been working there for 10 years now, most of this time in the Department for Agriculture and Environmental Auditing. So this is most of my experience is with environmental auditing. And I'm here today to present the Climate Scanner Global Initiative, which is an initiative from supreme audit institutions to assess government's actions towards climate change. And this initiative is still in its initial steps. So it's for now we're planning the project. We haven't started the proper assessment yet, but this is a project that is set to run throughout the next 2 years. So we expect to have the results by 2024. And I guess I am speaking here representing the public sector, but since I work in a supreme audit institution, it's a specific place in the public sector where we actually evaluate the action of the government. So we oversee the use of public funds and also the performance of public policies. And yeah, let's begin the presentation. So this project aims to answer to this question: what is the role of Supreme Audit Institutions, or SAIs, regarding climate change? And just a bit of context, Supreme Audit Institutions, this is some kind of institution that every country has one. We may come in different formats. Some of us are like in Brazilian case, are courts of ministers. In other cases, there is a controller general or an auditor general. But what we have in common is that we have mandates for conducting independent assessments on government's actions. And just to mention a couple a bit of our actuation, we conduct technical analysis. So the authority from these institutions come from these technical analysis. We also work with reliable data. Actually, we are a great ally for getting data from the government. Most of us have mandates for demanding data from the government, and we also usually have the mission to encourage transparency and accountability within government. So I think we can also contribute to make relevant data for the society more available. And that in turn will contribute to social control, which is citizens, civil society, academia can make use of this data for research, for demanding governments about what they should be doing. So this information we produce is quite useful in this way. And this is just a picture of the place where I work in, the Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts. Just to give a bit more of context, the activity of Supreme Audit Institutions has been recognized by the UN's General Assembly in this resolution. So they acknowledged our contribution to promoting efficiency, accountability, transparency within governments. And this year, TCU, Brazilian SAI, has assumed the chairmanship of the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, which means we have 3 years ahead of the greatest organization of this kind of institution. And for this period, we're taking this opportunity for proposing this project, which is the climate scanner. Actually, yesterday we had our minister, Bruno Dantas, just assumed the presidency of the court, and he is also the chair of Intosai now. This project is aligned to these international agreements, the Paris Agreement and the SDG 13 as well. As you know, these agreements mention topics such as adaptation and resilience, mitigation of emission of greenhouse gases, capacities, and also financial flows from developed countries to countries in development. Well, and just to wrap up then, the Climate Scanner is this initiative by SAIs for assessing government's actions for climate. Among the objectives, we intend to assess national government's action for climate. We also are going to use this data produced in the national level for consolidation in a global picture. This information is going to be useful to support decision making within SAIs and also for governments as well. We intend to communicate the most relevant information produced by SAIs, and this will be useful for SAIs so they can share knowledge among themselves and experience, so they can also grow their capacities. And we also intend to use this to position Intosai, the international organization of SAIs, as a relevant global actor, which produces useful information. So the challenge of Climate Scanner is how to be useful, how to produce this useful information, but at the same time be feasible by all SAIs, because SAIs they are in different stages when it comes to assessing government's action towards climate. Some of them have more experience, they have conducted previous works on the subject. Some of them have never had any contact with the subject yet. So the challenge is how to make this project inclusive for all SAIs, no matter in which stage they are. Our proposal is to conduct this assessment on 3 main axes: governance, financing, and public policies, and to do that in both the national and the international levels. So our institutions usually work with audits, but Climate Scanner is not supposed to be an audit. It's supposed to be a complementary work to an audit. An audit is usually it takes a specific scope and it goes deep into that scope. Climate scanner is supposed to be a more like an overview, a wide overview. So we're going to try to address as many topics as possible under those three axes that I commented before. But we're not going too deep, because this information is supposed to show critical issues where countries need to prioritize their actions. So it's more like, how can I say, an initial gathering of information, of data. In the national level, countries will conduct rapid reviews that will be useful as input for their planning of future works and audits. And it's also going to be useful for decision making in the government. So we intend to collect data from many different sources, governments, official databases, SAI's previous works, if they have any, and or academia as well. So they will be able to use the data that they collect from those sources to conduct this analysis. The idea is that we have a standardized assessment, so we are intending to map topics that can be common ground for all countries participating, because we know that climate change, even though it's an issue that affects us all, it produces different impacts in countries. So we have to find that these topics that can be considered common ground, we have to agree on common metrics, and then conduct our analysis based on that. So we can have as an output the national scores, the additional info, dashboards with information that can be assessed by society. This is just a draft of what we imagine as a communication product for this initiative. And if we manage to gather many SAIs in this project, then we'll be able to move on to the next level, which is the international level. So in the international level, we intend to consolidate data generated in the national context. Since they're going to be standardized, this is going to be made easier. So we can have this global overview. And we also want to take this opportunity that we have now, SAIs working together in a joint effort, to also conduct some cross-border analysis that wouldn't be possible if we were working isolated. So, for example, some possible topics for that are financial flows and global climate governance. And we can use that data produced in the cross-border analysis to interpret the data that will be produced and consolidated in the national levels. So this is the data flow for the international, the global level. Here it's another example of a communication product we can have by the end of the initiative. This is focusing the global picture. So this is just a draft again, but this is showing where the world is stronger in tackling climate issues, but also where it needs to focus more attention, dedicate more efforts. This data is not final, not official, just a draft. And we intend to, by the end, to go to an even simpler degree of communicating information. So we intend to communicate also the main challenges that countries and the world is facing regarding climate, but also the strengths it possesses to face them. As for the project strategy, next year, we are starting to form an executive group of SAIs, with SAIs that have expertise in the subject of climate, so we can build this tool together. So even though it's a proposal from TCU Brazil, it will have contribution of other SAIs. By now we have already 15 SAIs interested in being part of this executive group, and they come from many different parts of the world. We have, for example, the US, Canada, we have UK, we have South Africa, Maldives, Thailand. I think Indonesia is too. So many, Chile, so many SAIs interested in contributing. And this executive group will be responsible for designing the methodology for the assessment, but also other activities that we will need as support for these projects, such as theoretical basis, legal basis, technological solutions as well. So this year, actually, we have already done a lot of networking. We have showed this project in many different forums, including at the INCOSAI, which was the International Congress of Supreme Audit Institutions, which was held in Rio last month. I think we made the news in a couple of networks in Brazil because of this project. And so next year, we are going to focus on developing the methodology and running pilot tests. So by 2024, we can share this with SIIs around the world so they can apply it, produce results, and we can consolidate that into the global picture I just mentioned. And I'm already finishing my presentation, but I'd like to, I added 2 more slides after seeing the presentations from today, because I think this may also be interesting. We have conducted a couple of works related to climate, deforestation, and related issues that may be interesting to you. We have conducted from 2019 to 2020 this coordinated audit on protected areas. We involved 17 countries from Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula in assessing how protected areas were being managed in each country. And we also, protected areas is also a strategy for mitigating the emissions of greenhouse gases. In the Brazilian context, we were able to also conduct an assessment of a comparison of how protected areas behaved in mitigating gases, the emission of gases, if compared to other areas that were not protected. So we had a very interesting result, and if you access this QR code, you can see the results on that. But yeah, we found that protected areas are an effective way to contributing to the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases. And previously to that, from 2017 to 2018, we had another coordinated audit on the preparedness of Latin American countries for implementing the SDGs. And we intended to see how governments were preparing themselves to incorporate the 2030 agenda into their legislation, into public policies, into the integration of institutions. And we found that some of our findings that most of the governments lacked long-term national plans for implementing long-term goals. Also, they had problems with the coordination of public policies, the integration of public policies. Like we have seen before today, SDGs are interconnected, and you need to have many agencies, ministries, and institutions working together for a common goal. And we found that there was a lacking point in this audit. So also there's a QR code if you're interested in more information. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. And if you want more information, there's the QR code.
Very sustainable. Thank you, Dashiell. It was amazing. I have no doubt that your presentation will be very helpful, not only for this workshop, but for the project. And maybe the results of the project can be useful for the climate scanner. Thank you very much. Now I would like to address some questions, one for Giovanni and another to Dashiell. Giovanni, are you there? Mi sente? Ciao, Giovanni.
Of course, yeah.
Oh, great. I will just change the screen here. Okay, sorry, Dashiell. Okay, thank you. Okay, Giovanni. We can see you also. Okay, Giovanni, in your presentation, you mentioned the challenges that the private sector may have to face because different jurisdictions are likely to apply different competition rules to data sharing in sustainability projects. Do you think there is the chance that international guidelines will be developed?
Thank you, Vicente. So the issue is quite partly because of what I mentioned before, of the territorial nature of both competition law and IP. But I think that the work that we can do here at WIPO, but also together with UNCTAD and our colleagues at the World Trade Organization, I think we can come up with a general framework that the business community can use in this kind of projects. As you may know, the OECD is revising their new guidelines on competition enforcement in intellectual property cases. And so hopefully this will also help the international community, both the IP and the competition communities, to understand that either we go that way with a certain standardization and common understanding of how these rules should be implemented internationally, or otherwise we will have a situation with different solutions to very similar conducts, and that I think would be detrimental in sustainability projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Tasha, the 2030 agenda
and the SDGs are a shared responsibility. Governments, parliaments, private sector, civil society, academia, citizens, all these actors have their share of contribution. How will the climate scanner involve these actors in the project?
Thank you, Professor Vicente, for the question. This is a question we have been asked about when we were presenting the climate scanner to other audiences. They were asking us about where exactly private sector, academia, and civil society were in our assessment, because Action for Climate, the government has a relevant role in the climate action, but it is not the only actor, the only stakeholder that has some contribution. So we were pushed to apply this whole of society approach in this project. And what we intend to do is, as an SAIs have different mandates around the world. Some of them, there are some that have some mandates over private sector, for example, but most of us do not. So we can only go so far into demanding the government about how they are involving other stakeholders, or how the government is interacting with other stakeholders. But this is something we can do. We can ask them about that, about their mechanisms for coordination and articulation with other stakeholders. So this is where we can act in this sense. But also the climate scanner is a project that is going to be, it has to be built, like I said, by many SAIs, but also with the contribution of other experts, because we want to embed the vision of many different sectors, so we can be more effective in our response. So the idea is that we have this executive group of SAIs working on the tool, but also an opportunity for calling other experts to contribute and give their insights, so we can perfect this evaluation tool. And I think this is how we intend to make them participate in this initiative.
Thank you very much, Dachel. And now we have another 15 minutes left. So I'm happy to invite all the participants to join us. Please use the microphone and introduce yourself, saying your name and institution. If you have some questions, this is the moment.
Thank you. So my name is Germán Johansen. I'm part of the organization team from the Max Planck Institute. And thank you very much for the presentations, Mr. Napolitano, and also to Dashiell, if I pronounced it correctly, Dashiell Costa. So I have two questions, one to each one. Maybe first to Mr. Napolitano. It's maybe a more general question that we wanted to somehow address in this first panel, which is more focused on the SDG framework, and it's the very maybe basic question about what does sustainable mean, since you are part of the UN, who are basically the institution that created that framework some years ago. And why I'm asking that question, because so especially in the context of climate change, in which we have one of the big issues is greenwashing. Nowadays we see that there are the risk that many persons, companies, or whatever use the sustainability like label just to try to marketing themselves, and then also in the specific context of, for example, agriculture. For example, a project that could be could foster innovation or increase efficiencies. I mean, could on the other hand can have like trade-offs with other SDGs as well. So when there are different SDGs that are interconnected and there might be in conflict, how can we somehow measure that and decide whether a project at the end is sustainable or isn't? So that's my question. If you can give some insights about that. And then, so I had a question to Professor Furke, but maybe I just will comment that openly if anyone wants to comment.
Herman,
that.
can we wait to the answer from
sure.
Professor Giovanni, then you?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
thank you. Please, Giovanni.
Thank you, Vicente, and please don't call me professor because I have very little to teach, and I don't want to take the title for those who worked a lot to get it. So thank you for the question. I think it's a legitimate question. I mentioned in one of my slides about the need, for instance, for the financial sector that sometimes provides the funds for the for some of the projects in the framework of the SDGs to come up with a standard so that within that community they can have certain benchmarks on what is a proper sustainable project and what is, as you mentioned, a greenwashing project, and the risk is there, of course. I think probably more regulation is needed to make sure that the money and the work goes to the legitimate projects. One of the ways that we have tried to deal with that is, as I mentioned, with this WIPO Green initiative, where we basically we don't certify, of course, the quality of the technologies, but we go into depth and we analyze whether the technology has been implemented, what kind of results they've had, and therefore they qualify to be included in the database. So that a proper use of those technologies can be done. The risk is there, and I think we all have to be vigilant. And from the consumer protection point of view, I know that there are several competition authorities, those that deal with unfair competition, that look exactly at this kind of aspects when companies try to present themselves as as green companies or selling green products when in fact they're not. So I think that there are several institutions that are looking at these aspects from different angles. But it's a big challenge, and we all have to be there to make sure that that we achieve those goals by 2030. Thank you.
I don't want to monopolize.
Another question? A question?
Otherwise, I can do.
Arul has a question.
Hi, my name is Arul and I'm from India. I teach at the National Law School in Bangalore. So thanks to all the three speakers for the excellent presentation. Just one quick question for Mr. Costa. So in the draft image which you shared, which is focusing on the three axes, one of the areas wherein I think things are still looking at red is coherence with regard to different policies. So one, can you tell us or illustrate it through maybe one or two examples? The second thing is how far the government is responding to that big challenge. And because I am also asking this because we see similar challenges in countries like India also. Thank you.
Sorry, I just didn't understand the topic you mentioned in the first question.
In the first one, yes, can you illustrate through maybe examples where you see incoherence in the policies? Second thing is how is the government responding to your finding with regard to this incoherence in
Governance and policies.
incoherence. I think that's incoherence. Yeah, because there is one dimension called coherence in policy, which I think is shown as the factor wherein least progress is.
Well, the assessment hasn't been done yet, so this is just what we are thinking of assessing, and this is going to be a challenge, assessing incoherence between policies. I think this is probably one of the issues we are going to look into, but I'm not so sure if it's going to come under the axis of public policies or under the axis of governance, because it relates to both axes. I think it could be either here or there. In the audit on the SDGs, we have used an assessment tool called the DFOG analysis, which stands for duplication, fragmentation, overlap, and gaps, which allows us to look into that issue, coherence between policies. So maybe we'll bring that analysis tool into this project as well as a possible technique for analysis. I'm not so sure yet. But this decision of what to assess is going to rest on the shoulders of the executive group next year. So if they consider this issue a relevant one to be assessed, it'll be in. My guess is that it's going to be in because it's one of the most critical, I would say, and it's one of those issues that can be considered a common ground for countries. All countries must have integrated and coordinated policies. So I think it's hard to see that countries won't consider that relevant. I think it'll be part. And just to illustrate a little bit with examples about how we intend to conduct that assessment, for example, in policy coherence, which is a good topic to give an example, we are going to check if we're probably going to build a metric, some rating system, for example, 0 to 10, just an example. And we're going to consider some items that we want to check. So if countries have these items in place, then they will score higher and higher. For example, if they have coordination mechanisms, agencies for doing that, if they have mechanisms for looking into laws, legislation, regulation before they come out and see if they consider other regulations around. So things like that, if they implement whole of government approaches into their policies. So we're going to check items. The idea is doing this overview. It's not going to be too deep, but it's going to give a good notion of what's happening on each of those topics.
Thank you, Dachel. Thank you, Giovanni. As I can see, Giovanni, your watch is showing that it's lunchtime. So I will not compete with that. So thanks so much to our speakers, Dachel, Giovanni, Paulo Furquim. Unfortunately, Pilar couldn't join us today. And I invite all the participants for a big round of applause. Thank you so much. We will start again at 15 past 2, a quarter past 2, sharp, with Herman. Sharp, please, sharp. Remember Giovanni's watch, please. With Herman and Carolina introducing the project about Brazil, and then with panel 2. Have a good lunch. Arrivederci Giovanni, ci vediamo, ci sentiamo dopo. Grazie.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.